when we go to my grandma's house, there is a picture that was on her fridge. And it was one of those pictures of like that someone had drawn like a face, and the face was different on one side than the other side, like based on how you looked at it. Does that make sense? Like if you looked at it right side up, it was one person's face. And when you looked at it upside down, it was another person's face, kind of like that one right there. And I used to just stare at that thing for the longest time and just look at it and just be like, oh, what is that? And then I like flip it around and look at it. And it was the weirdest thing because as you looked at it, like once you saw the one version of it, you almost couldn't see it the other way for a while. So like this one, if you look at the one that is on your right, it took me the longest time, but then I realized, oh, it's a guy and it's his nose, and then he's kind of got a mustache and his face is kind of chopped off here and he's got an incredibly lower face. And I probably wasted too much time looking at these in search for pictures of that. Oh, that one's neat. Oh, that one's really cool. But it's interesting. So as you look at it, it's kind of like, oh, so which way is it supposed to be? Does it matter? And you kind of get focused on one or the other. And that's kind of the central idea that we've been talking about throughout this series. We named this series, Which Way is Up? Because the reality is that when we listen to Jesus' teachings and when we look at them, they're confusing. They sound completely off. And our tendency is when we read them to hear them and to think, oh, that's not right. He's got it off. And then we try to explain it away in some way well, maybe it's a mistranslation. Maybe it's something here. Maybe it's adapted or changed somewhere over the years. And we put all these things along the way to qualify it as to why they aren't how they should be. And we've said in this series, what if Jesus actually was right? What if what he says is actually how the world was meant to work? And the reality is that we have just become so absorbed and so saturated with the screwed up way of how the world is today that we can't even see it for what it really is. And I don't think, when I make a statement like that, I don't want the tendency to be to think like, oh, the world, blah, and kind of get into that mindset. But my goodness, I mean, just watch the news for 5 minutes and you'll quickly come to the conclusion something's not right. Something is not as it was intended to be. And so maybe instead of keep pushing on the same things and keep believing the same things that we always have in terms of this is how I'm supposed to function, this is how I'm supposed to live, this is what life is supposed to be like, what if we actually believed Jesus and took him at his word and saw this as a sign as to him? He is showing us this is what his kingdom is going to be like. And we have an opportunity to start living in it now. And so he says this in Matthew chapter 5, verse 3. He says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. And blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And we're in the third week of this series as we've kind of walked through them. And as we've looked at the first two, I think our thought is like when we hear, blessed are the poor in spirit and blessed are those who mourn, we kind of wonder initially, we go, well, is that true? Is that really how things are supposed to be? Is that right? And then when we get to this one, if you read ahead and you get to meek, this is kind of the one that you penciled. Because the first two are like I'm not so sure about this. I'm not so sure if that's correct. And then we get to blessed are the meek, and we kind of go, no thanks. Like I have no desire, I have no intention in my entire life of being meek. No thank you, that's not me. And we kind of get this idea of what does it mean to be meek? What's it look like to be meek? And I think the word that pops into our heads right away, merely because it rhymes, is we think weakness. And so we immediately think Jesus is standing up here to all these people who are listening to him, trying to figure out what his life is going to be about, what his kingdom is going to look like. And it almost seems like he's going, blessed are the weak. Blessed are those who put themselves in a position to be taken advantage of. And we think, I don't want that. And it's kind of like along the way we think, you know what I want? I want to marry someone who's meek. I don't want to be the one who's meek. Like, doesn't that sound great? Don't elbow your spouse or anything like that. You can just internally nod your head like, yes, it does, Kevin. We think, man, I don't want to be meek. And then he gives that second part, which sounds even crazier. For they will inherit the earth. And it's like, no, they don't. Like, right? The meek don't inherit the earth. Can I get some light so I can actually see if you're out there? Because right now I'm just talking to, I appreciate the laughs along the way because they give me the clues that I'm not by myself. And we think, no, they don't. They don't inherit the earth. Absolutely not. And then you've got to come to this thing as well, because we go, all right, first of all, no, the meek don't inherit the earth. But then, of all the promises that he gives throughout these, do we even want the earth? Like, you have to look at that in some sense, like, they'll inherit the earth. It's like, it's not that great. And so I think a lot of people, when they read through these, we kind of get to the ones that are later on, and we go, pure in heart, for they'll see God. Oh, yeah. Hungry, they'll be filled. Thank you very much. Persecuted because of righteousness. No, not so much. But then this is the one that we just kind of gloss over, and it seems irrelevant and unimportant to us. Blessed are the meek, no thanks, for they'll inherit the earth. Don't want it that much anyway. But here's the thing about these that I think is so important, is we don't have to figure out what makes the meek blessed. And we don't have to figure out how we can live in some different way and turn it and change it and morph it a little bit so it actually means something significant. Jesus says right here, he says, the meek are blessed. There's no doubt about it. The meek are blessed. We just have to figure out what that really means. And I think the first thing that we need to pull up that's so significant on this is that when we say meek, we often think something very different than what Jesus meant. I'm going to teach you a Greek word. When you go home today, you will know one Greek word. The Greek word is praus. Can you say praus? There we go. You're fluent. I took 2 Greek classes in college as part of my education. They taught me how to go back up to a dictionary to look up the words to see what they mean. All the schooling, like, you know what? I realized this is important, but I'm never going to remember it. So there we go. So I knew to go back and look it up. And this Greek word, praus, is very important because it has all these different meanings, all these different things that were associated with it. And so when Jesus would say, blessed, I don't know the Greek words for blessed are the, because I didn't look those up in the dictionary. But when he says, blessed are the praus, all these images would have popped up in people's heads. And one of the most significant ones in terms of how it was used for that day was referring to a horse. But not just any horse, a war horse. A horse that would be used to engage in battle. Now people would have known immediately in that day the process that the horse would have to go through to be trained, to be ready, to be used for battle. You see, when you had a horse in battle, it was very important that the horse would completely obey its rider. That there would be no disobedience, that there would be no fear whatsoever on the part of the horse. Because you couldn't have, when you were in the heat of the battle, when you were in the most significant moments, for the horse to get skittish, for the horse to get scared. And so this was a horse that understood that even though everything else around me may be chaos, I'm going to trust the one who has trained me. I'm going to say that again, and I want you to understand we're not talking about horses now. Even though everything around me may be chaos, I'm going to trust the one who has trained me. When a horse had been trained and was now obedient and was willing to do whatever its rider had said, whatever its trainer said along the way, it was now considered meek. Now this is significant because at this point in time, the horse is not weaker, okay? And I think we often get that idea that when that happens, somehow something is lost and we've had things taken away and a part of us is gone. No, the horse is not weaker. Now it takes its strength and it's able to control it because it knows the one who has trained it and it trusts him. Now look at this as a lens for how we see the rest of the Bible. And so when Jesus says, blessed are the meek, man, that radically changes how we see so many of these other things. I think one of the biggest problems that people have with the Bible is it's full of commands. Like, it's full of things that we tell people to do and not to do along the way. And it's always funny when you have kids, you try so desperately hard to get them to be obedient and to listen and to follow instructions. But if we're honest, moment of honesty, when you grow up, you don't like to follow instructions. Like, right? I don't. People tell me what to do. I want to do the opposite just because of it. And I don't know, maybe I've got some like internal problems, need some counseling, something like that along the way. But forget that. Let's just keep going with the sermon. But I mean, it's so funny because we get that, and we think when we read the Bible, we just go, oh, it's just rules. It's nothing but rules, and I want nothing to do with that. And then we do this other thing that is so silly that we almost act like it's a competition, which I understand because I'm a very competitive person. But we almost act like we should get a trophy for following the commands, as if the commands were the point. It's kind of, well, I did this, and I did that, and I did this, and so yay me. Now, we don't actually say that. We don't ever say yay me. We just look down upon all those who didn't follow the commands. Instead of going, wow, I got that right, we consistently go, oh, they got it wrong. Oh, they did that. Did you see them? Unfortunately, I don't think we have this as a church at all because I don't hear it, but I've heard it in my life that it comes along through the line of prayer requests. Don't you love that? The prayer requests that become a gossip line. Would you really pray for them? They're really making some bad choices. Well, will you tell me what the bad choices are so I know how to pray for them specifically? I'd be happy to. But we get that idea. We get that idea that the commands were the point. Instead of, blessed are the meek, which means blessed are those who have put themselves in a position to be used by God. Blessed are those who have put themselves in a spot where they can experience the freedom and the joy that life was meant to offer. And I think we often get in times in our lives where we get on those two different ends, where in one spot we'll be desperately searching for God, and we'll wonder, why is he so absent? Why is he so distant? And in the same vein, we'll be on the other side, and we'll search for joy and happiness and meaning. Like, these are the central questions that people ask in their lives. Why am I not happy? Why don't I experience joy? What's the purpose of my life? And we never stop and take a step back and go, have I put myself in a spot? Have I positioned myself where I can actually experience that? You see, what meek is about, it's about embracing our limitations. Embracing our limitations, which is an idea that we don't like at all. Look at it like this. I'm a sports nerd, in the sense that, like, I like not just sports, but I like all the commentary and stuff like that about sports, which some of you understand. The rest of you are like, I don't get it. And so, like, when the drafts are coming up, I find that fascinating. And so I spend way too much time listening to, like, 18-year-old kids, which they are at that point in time, what their height and weight and vertical is. And it's like, oh my goodness, he ran a 4.40? That's so fast. And Bethany's like, do the dishes. And I'm like, yeah, okay. So I try to do the dishes in 4.4, but that doesn't work. And so I think that's fascinating. But as these kids are growing up, and as they're coming out of high school and they're prepping for these different things, it cracks me up to listen to how the commentators talk about them. Like, they never say things in this line in terms of the sport that they're playing. They'll never say, you know what, they're going to be a very good player. They're going to start for their team. They never go, they're going to be an MVP one day. No, instead they don't talk about it in the context of sports because we don't like to embrace our limitations. And they'll say things like this: the sky is the limit. They can do anything they want. Now, we take that for granted because that's how we talk about things now. But that distinction is very important. We don't actually say the things that they actually could possibly do. We say they could do anything they want. And I think, no, they can't. They can play basketball. And that's about it. But they're not doing other stuff than that. And then we take that same mindset to our own lives. And I'll see men take on massive amounts of responsibility and lots of things, and they'll run themselves into the ground. I see women take on the burden of families and social lives and all these other things, and they just carry it, and they wonder why they get worn out. And I'll see parents let their kids run from thing to thing to thing to thing. And the kids get exhausted, and they don't smile. But we keep moving. But because we don't like the idea of embracing our limitations, we don't even like the thought that we have limitations. Because the thing that we believe is that we believe that we will accomplish, that we will achieve success through our effort. That if I just work a little harder, if I just do a little more, then I'll get the thing that I have looked for so long. I do this. Like, I believe wholeheartedly I can do anything for a season of life. Like, it doesn't matter how many responsibilities I have, how many different things that I'm doing. I can do anything for a given period of time. As long as it's not forever, if it's a year, I can do anything for a year. The thing that I struggle with is not ever be, or always being in that year. That over and over again I find myself where I go, well, this is just the season where I'm working really hard. And then it's the next season, and then it's the next season, and it keeps going. And the thing that is communicated throughout all this, and we would never say this, is the belief that I'm, or you're, God. Now look at that. None of us would ever step back in a moment and go, well, why are you working so hard? Well, it's because I'm God. You go, okay. Like, none of us would ever voice that. But that's what is communicated within those things. Because the idea is that if something's going to get done, if something's going to happen, we say this phrase in our culture, if you want something done, you're going to have to do it yourself. And so we want things done. We want things to go on. We want to feel something significant in our lives. And so we just keep on taking more and more and more. And we never stop and pause and go, maybe more wasn't the answer. And so we'll fill our schedules, and we'll feel empty, and we'll feel dry. And then we do this dumb thing, and we go, well, if I just add this, it'll probably be better. Maybe we're pursuing the wrong goal. Maybe we're completely running in the wrong direction. And maybe instead of the idea that strength comes through effort, strength comes through willpower, maybe strength comes through something else. A couple years ago, I got a chance to coach a junior high basketball team. And it was interesting. We were bad, okay, but we had lots of fun, which is probably not a surprise on both accounts. But so we're going along and we're doing drills one day, and I had this big guy on my team. Like, he was a tall kid. He was a large kid. He was easily the biggest player in the entire league. And he couldn't rebound. It was just making me nuts. And I didn't think I'd have to teach this big kid how to rebound, but he just couldn't rebound. And so what he'd do, and we'd like, you got to box out. You got to box someone out. And so he'd stand there, and he'd just kind of do this. And he'd be like, yeah, I'm boxing him out. And kids would keep running around him, and kids would kind of shove him in the back, which I probably shouldn't get in that, which I yelled at the refs at over the back, and they didn't listen. They got mad at me, but that's another story. And so, but like that all would happen and go through, and he just couldn't get a rebound. And finally, I realized what he was doing wrong. I said, dude, I know you're big. Like, I know you've got more weight than anyone else, but you've got to get low. It doesn't matter how big you are. You've got to sit your rear end down, and you've got to scoot them back and push them back that way. It doesn't matter if you're the biggest person. If they're underneath you, if they're positioned underneath you, they're always going to win that fight. It's the same thing if you watch football. The person who makes the tackle is always the person who is the lowest. A couple of years ago, I was reading a book by one of my favorite musicians, and he was talking about how he was working on this guitar part, and he couldn't quite get it right. And he tried over and over again, and it sounded sloppy. And so he went to this person who was this incredible guitar player and looking to them for training. And he said he started to play it for her. And she said, "Oh, your problem is," she said, it took her 2 seconds to realize what the issue was. She said, "Your wrist is 2 inches too low. If you just raise your wrist a little bit, you'll play it right." And he said, so he raised his wrist 2 inches and he played it perfectly. I share all those to say that it wasn't in any single one of those situations. It wasn't their size, it wasn't their skill, and it wasn't their talent that they had wrong. It was their positioning. That because they were out of position, they would not be successful. And I think this is what God is telling us to do throughout this. The Bible shows us how to position our lives. And it's full of commands, it's full of rules, it's full of things like that. But the rules were never the point. The point always is that God is saying, I am trying to show you the limitations with which you have been created. Because I hope this isn't news to you, but for some of you, this may be important that I say this. You can't do everything. And you can't do anything. There's a reason why I only give the message and I don't lead worship. It's not for lack of desire, but they have told me no, I am not allowed. But we think that. We think, oh, I'll just take this on and I'll take that on. But what he's showing here is that you have been designed with limitations. And what you need to do with your life, the greatest chance you have to have purpose, to have joy, to have happiness in your life, is to take your life and to position it under the limitations that God has set. And as soon as you begin moving it out from under God's word, you're going to experience frustration. You're going to experience difficulty and heartache. But as long as you have it here, blessed are the meek. That is your greatest chance for experiencing freedom and to be used by God. And when we understand that, the second half makes sense. He says, for they will inherit the earth. Now how do you get an inheritance? It's relationship. I mean, that's how we get our inheritance from people, is we're related to them. They're a part of our family. And this is what Jesus says in John 14:21. He says, whoever has my commands and keeps them is the one who loves me. The one who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I too will love them and show myself to them. The language that he is using here is he's saying, whoever follows my rules is the one who's part of my family. And as part of being a part of God's family, we will inherit the earth. That's just how it works. And this is what is amazing to me, and we should know this should be obvious, but we always think inheritance, or the way we get what we want, is just sheerly, we've got to be the hardest worker. We've got to do more than anyone else. And I'm not saying anything against hard work, because I believe wholeheartedly in the value of it, and I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But it strikes me as to how much of our success, in terms of how the world defines success, is because of luck, right? Like how much of what we become and how much people know us and how much we're recognized, basically I'm saying how famous we become, is because of luck. There's a book that came out a number of years ago by Malcolm Gladwell, and the title of the book was Outliers. And what he researched in the book is he was researching how did the people who are like just crazy successful, the people who are like in the top 1% of the top 1%, how did they get there? And he basically, at the end of the book, comes down to the conclusion, yeah, they did some things. That they positioned themselves. They worked hard. That they were smart. They were dedicated. But he basically comes down at the end of the book and he said, you know what? The way they got there is because of luck. That's it. In one of the parts of the book, he traces the people whom we know today as the tycoons of the computer industry. And he goes through your Bill Gates, your Steve Jobs, your Steve Wozniak, your David Allen. And he kind of goes through all those different people. And he said, okay, so how did they get there? And he found this incredible stream of factors that all of them were born within about 2.5 years of each other, and all of them at the point in time, computers were very rare, that they lived within distance of a major computer, which they said there were only a few of them in the United States at the time, that they lived within the range of a computer and were able to get access to it. And it says, so what they find is that of these people who we push to the top, we say, oh, these guys, they're the geniuses. And that's how it is. It's because they're so talented and they're so smart. And he said, it's an incredibly extraordinary set of circumstances that happen to get them to the point where they are. He said, yeah, they worked hard. But you know what the reality is they're lucky. They're lucky that they were there. And I think that's why we inherit what we do, is because it's God's to give. And so we inherit it because of that relationship. But I think there's a second part of this inheritance. I think the meek are the ones who actually enjoy life. Not just get through it, not just succeed, but the meek are the ones who enjoy life. There's a story, and I'm sure it's not true, okay? But I'll tell it anyway, of a fisherman who was sitting by a lake one day. And it said that an entrepreneur walked past him and said, why aren't you out there fishing? And the fisherman said, well, I've already caught my lot for the day. I've already caught what I needed to. And the entrepreneur goes, well, you could go out there and catch more. Why wouldn't you go out there and keep catching fish? And the fisherman goes, why would I do that? He goes, well, if you caught more fish, then over time you would make more money and you could buy a better boat. The fisherman goes, so what would I do then? And he goes, once you had a better boat, then you could catch even more fish, and then you could buy better nets. And then as you kept going, you could hire a crew who would catch more fish for you. And then you could buy a couple boats. You could have a fleet of boats, and you could be in charge of all these. And they would keep going out, and they would catch more and more fish for you. And so you could keep growing through that. And the fisherman goes, well, then what would I do? And the entrepreneur goes, well, then you could sit around and enjoy life. And the fisherman said, what do you think I'm doing now? How many of us, that's the story of our life? I need more, and then I'll be satisfied. Maybe that's not what Jesus was offering there. And so when the Bible says some of these things that sound crazy to us, like one of the 10 commands that God gives is to honor the Sabbath. It's to take a day off. And I think that's the one that we should follow more than anything else. But it's the one we ignore. Take a day off? No. And I think within that is not just an understanding of who God is, but it's an understanding that we were not created to just work. We were not created just to give more and more and more and more, that we need to rest. And we need to be reminded that we need to rest. And if you violate that, if you move out from under that, your life is going to be hard. I get in spots where, honestly, I look at all the different things that I'm doing, and they're all good. But if I'm doing too much of all of them, I begin to hate all of them. And again, they're all good things. And so I can never look at anything and go, well, that doesn't matter. Well, that's not important. But as it fills up and it becomes too much, if I never take a step off and rest, I begin to despise everything I'm doing. On the other side, Jesus says this, or it comes later in the New Testament. It says, he who won't work shouldn't eat. Now here's what we do, and this is what kills me about this, is we take that statement, he who won't work shouldn't eat, and we've made it a political thing. It was never meant to be a political statement. It was never meant to be a form of government. It was for you individually. Understand that work and purpose and contributing something is significant. It's good. It is good for you to have something that you are working to. It is good for you to have something that you are adding value to. When Jesus commands us, this is important, commands us to forgive, he's not doing it for the other person. He's saying it for you. Because as long as you have not forgiven, what happens is your heart becomes filled with greed and jealousy and bitterness, in anger. And when that happens, we begin to see that through the lens, through the rest of our life. And he's saying as soon as you move out from under that, your life is going to be filled with hatred. And so forgive. Embrace that limitation. And you'll experience the joy that your life was meant to have. Matthew 11:28. Jesus says this. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. I think we hear that and we think, yoke? I don't want a yoke. It sounds like work. That sounds like limitations. And it is. But this is what I've come to the conclusion of, and I hope you can as well. I need limitations. I do. I need limitations in my life. Because if they are not there, I will run myself into the ground. And I need those guidelines. I need those boundaries for myself. And this is what I see. I see as a culture, as a way of life, we are finding ourselves that we are moving further and further away from the way in which God said this is life at its best. And something is happening at the exact same time. Is we're becoming more and more miserable and depressed as a culture. And those two things are not coincidence. And so what he's saying here is he's saying, if you orient your life under how I have designed for it to work, because I am the one who has created you, you'll experience life as it was always intended to be. So he says right here, blessed are those who know they are not God, for you will live the life that others only dream of. Let me pray for you. Fathers, we're here today. For each one of us, my guess is there is a command, there's a rule, there's something along the way that we have resisted, that we have pushed off, that we have desired to not be a part of our lives. And so, Father, my prayer in this moment is that for each one of us, we are aware of the fact that what you desire for us is not to control us, is not to remove the fun from our lives, is not to remove the things that we would find joy from, but that your goal has always been that we would find the purpose and joy and meaning for which we were created. And so, Lord, for us today, I ask that you help us make the very, very bold choice to embrace meekness, to embrace life as you intended it to be. And that through that, we would find the purpose, joy, and meaning for which you created us. I pray this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.